Stand in session. Items 1 through 6 are executive sessions and direction to staff, scheduled for 65 minutes. Items 1, 3, and 5 are executive sessions. Ms. Clerk.
The first executive session is noticed as Item 1, Executive Session, Prepayment of Series 2009 Certificates of Participation for Tucson Convention Center Expansion Project and amendments to related lease and sublease agreements, and is being held pursuant to ARS 38-431.03 A3, A4, and A7. The second executive session is noticed as Item 3, Executive Session, Potential Sale or Lease of City Property located at the southeast corner of South Granada Avenue and West Calle, Carlos, Arruza, and is being held pursuant to ARS Section 38-431.03 A3, A4, and A7. The final executive session is noticed as Item 5, Executive Session, Potential Sale of City-Owned Property located at 114 and 124 East Broadway Boulevard, and is being held pursuant to ARS Section 38-431.03 A3, A4, and A7.
May I have a motion to go into executive session? Move. No motion and second to go into executive session. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Let's do it. go back into regular session. We got a motion and a second to go back into regular session. All in favor say aye. All right, we're back in regular session. What is the council's pleasure for item 2?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I move that Mayor and Council direct the city manager to proceed as discussed in executive session and to coordinate with the Rio Nuevo District to carry out the prepayment of our V2 2009 TCC certificates of participation subject to the conditions discussed in executive session. Those include negotiating a new lease or sublease agreement between the district and the city under which the city's current rental payment obligations end upon the prepayment of the outstanding certificates of participation.
Second. Got motion second. Any other discussion on that matter?
And that we also preserve our quiet enjoyment uses and all those other terms.
Right. Anything else? If not, all in favor say aye. Anyone opposed? That motion passes. What's the council's pleasure for item 4?
That we direct the city manager to proceed as discussed in executive session with respect to the music hall parking lot.
Got a motion second on that item. Any discussion on that item? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion passes. What's the council's pleasure for item 6?
Mr. Mayor, that we direct the city manager to proceed as discussed and in exec and bring back to the mayor and council any and all proposed agreements as needed for the proposed sale of the 124 East Broadway property.
Second.
Got a motion second on that matter. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion passes. Let's move on to item 7, shared mobility devices, scheduled for 30 minutes. Time has been set aside for discussion of a limited time pilot program for shared mobility devices. Mr. Manager?
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as described in the Mayor and Council memorandum, the materials have been brought back to the Mayor and Council for your review and consideration with respect to the shared mobility devices, the electric scooter pilot program. Certain revisions have been made based on the earlier conversations that the Mayor and Council had in your previous meetings on this topic. Included in your materials are the draft with respect to the fees, to the program requirements for the pilot program, the insurance requirements, the proposed indemnity language, and I think I mentioned already, I'll say it again, the proposed fee schedule. So the intention today was to allow you to provide feedback and discuss what's been provided in the materials so that the item can be brought back for the Mayor and Council's approval at the next available meeting.
Okay. Councilmember Durham, you want to open this discussion?
Yeah, I have some.
You need to, I think, make sure either your mic's on or you're talking into it.
Mr. Mayor, while he does that, are we going to get a presentation from staff to discuss the additions and changes?
I see Mr. Beam is sitting there. I would have expected that he would have already been at the table. I don't know. Sure. Mr. Bemis, Councilmember Romero has asked to give a little more detail of what's happened between then and now. You want to do that?
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, for having us back to review this issue. I can give an overview, tack onto, I think, the changes that we've made since the last round, address some of the questions that we heard from you in our individual meetings one-on-one, and then open it up for whatever questions you have in discussion. So sure. Just as a reminder, the proposal right now is for a 6-month period, a pilot program. We heard a desire to have less than 4 operators during a pilot, so we've adjusted that to be 2 rather than 4 during that 6-month period. We maintained the 1,000 scooter limit, so now 500 per operator, whereas before it was 250 for 4 operators.
So I read in the paper this morning 1,500, but that must have been a typographical error.
Well, I was getting to that part. So we do, No, that's accurate. So it's 1,000 without any geographic restriction, and then there's an equity incentive where companies can launch an additional 250 vehicles in areas of high need.
I
Outside of
apologize.
the urban core. So
I read wrong.
they don't have to take advantage of that. So if they do, the total max possible would be 1,500. They do, similar to the proposal before, they have the opportunity to apply to expand their fleet if they demonstrate a minimum utilization rate of at least 3 rides per vehicle per day. We don't have to approve that expansion, but if they're demonstrating demand, we would receive an application to expand. If they get less than 2 rides per vehicle per day, we can request that they remove scooters from the street. Also worth noting, during the pilot, we retain the authority to make changes, terminate, enforce parking restrictions, or other geofencing issues at any time. We've developed a request for proposal process, which was requested at the last study session. So we've developed scoring criteria. We'll put out and ask vendors to apply. We will score them based on their experience and qualifications, their safety strategies, their user outreach, education, and compliance strategies, equitable access strategies, their labor and operations practices, and their sustainability practices. And the firms, the top 2 ranked firms, we would invite to participate in the pilot program. The fee structures, so we've increased the permit application fee to account for staff time involved with an RFP process, which is a little more intensive, so that's up to approximately $4,000 for a permit application. $15,000 annual permit fee, which is the same as it was before, and we've introduced a 20 cents per trip right-of-way use fee, whereas before it was at $1 per vehicle per day. So the estimate is that assuming an average of 3 rides per vehicle per day, we don't know what the system would get, but let's say we got 3, that would generate $132,144 in the first 6-month period. If that were extended for a full year, we'd be looking at $256,944.
If it expands to 1,500 e-scooters, the fee goes up to what?
So it would be based on a per trip fee rather than a per scooter fee now. So if we assume 3 rides per scooter with an additional 500 scooters, there would be an additional $54,600 in the initial 6-month period. So approximately $100,000 more dollars a year.
Go ahead, Councilman.
There's a couple other review
sure.
points, and then
Yep.
open it up.
Yep.
So you had asked, and several of you asked in our individual meetings, to look at what sort of other cities in Arizona and across the country are both charging and what their permit structures are like. Within Arizona, with the exception of Phoenix, who like us had prior legislation prohibiting scooters, all the other operators in the Phoenix area were operating without a permit. So they either had a business license or a temporary operating agreement or no agreement with the city. Tempe, and those include Tempe, Mesa, Scottsdale, Glendale, and Peoria. Tempe has since implemented a permit structure very similar to ours in terms of fees, insurance, indemnification, with the notable exception that they have no limit on the number of vehicles or the number of vendors. Mesa and Scottsdale do not have permits in place, although my understanding from speaking with their staff is they're intending to do that and go through the process we're going through now. And Glendale and Peoria do not have scooter operations anymore. I understand they weren't able to come to agreement with operators of how to operate in their city. Phoenix, like us, like I said, they had it prior legislation banning scooters on their streets. They are now considering moving in the direction of Tempe and us and developing a pilot program restricted to a 2-square-mile area in their downtown. We, in a material sent out just earlier today in response to questions from Vice Mayor Fimbres' office, we provided a chart that shows a kind of example of what other cities are charging, and we estimated what their annual fees would be. In some cases, when they have no limit on scooters, that's not possible to estimate, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that if you have them. Yeah, I think we can open it up.
Okay, Councilman Romero.
Thank you. What do you have a definition for those 250 additional vehicles in terms of the high need areas? Have you defined that area?
Yes, our proposal at this time was to use the indicators of neighborhood stress map that Planning and Development Services created, which incorporates several different factors related to poverty, motor vehicle access, transit usage, and allow additional vehicles launched in areas noted as highest need on that map.
And part of the conversation that we had the last time was that we wanted to make sure that we're connecting that last mile, which is, I think that our To Go Bike program does really well, that it connects one area to the next, to the next. And so will we have some sort of jurisdiction, for lack of a better term, as to where the locations will be? Because these are dockless, right? Are there any type of station available, or do the companies just come and drop 250 scooters off in wherever?
A very good question, Councilmember Romero. Yeah, so the first part of the question was for connecting with transit. Right, so our understanding, in the proposal right now, we don't specify you have to launch X number of vehicles in X location. Our understanding from operators that they tend to partner with local businesses who want to see the local coffee shop or the local restaurant like seeing the X number outside for people to use. We encourage them to launch them near transit stops to help with that first and last mile issue. Our approach was to evaluate this during the pilot, and we expect that we'll be making changes as we learn who is using them and how, and to what extent they're helping people access transit or not, and make adjustments during that pilot period. So if we find that they just launched far too many in one specific area, we can address that later and designate specific parking areas. We can limit the number of scooters that are staged next to each other at a time, but that's not something that was included out of the gate.
There was a question from the Downtown Tucson Partnership about the usage and how we deal with overcrowdedness and moving those scooters around. They have, purple shirt people, and they're expecting that there might be some usage of their time for removing barriers for people to walk on sidewalk, et cetera. How do we work with other quasi-governmental organizations that would probably spend some time helping us clear?
That's a good question. Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, we have had several meetings with Kathleen and the Downtown Tucson Partnership. We don't, at this time, we hope that they don't have to have an excessive amount of time relocating scooters. Our preference is to put that on operators, so they have 2 hours to respond to any complaints for improperly parked scooters. And if they don't, we would use our resources to impound scooters if necessary. Again, they're relatively lightweight vehicles, so if we're talking one scooter falling over blocking an access ramp, certainly we would expect our people to move it. That's primarily our Park Tucson agents. We're in close discussions with them because they're out in our urban core regularly. So if they see any minor issues, they can take care of it, really no expense to them. Major issues, we report it to the company. If they don't take action, then we take action against them.
Okay, Councilmember Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Enforcement of any of the rules and regulations with regard to that, will that fall completely on the shoulders of the Tucson Police Department?
Thank you, Councilmember. No, primarily for Tucson Police Department is one of the enforcement elements in parking and riding behavior, but also our parking agents can do that as well.
If someone is using a scooter on private property and they're not doing the things that are required by the rules of the company, who can monitor that?
Private property.
Someone's got a scooter roaring around on a parking lot belonging to a private facility.
The regulations say right now that you wouldn't be allowed to operate without approval of the property owner. In this case, I'm not sure.
Be a restaurant or a hotel or anything like that.
I think one of the values, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Scott, of doing it as a pilot is to see what the most effective responses to these enforcement issues are going to be. To the extent there's a private trespass, which might be what you'd be describing there, then that could be an instance where TPD does get called in for a trespass issue.
To be anecdotal, and in some of the observation in other cities where I have seen this, I have seen an 18-year-old person apparently rent that scooter and then hand it over to a minor and have two minors on the scooter on private property, and I saw that more than once. So this is anecdotal, my personal observation. I have some deep concerns about the safety and the regulations that apparently will not, by nature of having people around to stop that kind of behavior, that this would go on and on, potentially unnoticed, and be violations of that kind of use of this scooter. I have some concerns about the safety of those who rent these and then hand them over to others who are not supposed to use them. How do we deal with that? Or is that a non-question?
Thank you, Councilmember Scott. No, I think that is a very good question, and certainly safety is one of our primary concerns in evaluating this moving forward. I think one of the reasons we've been very intentional about having this be a limited time pilot operation where we retain a lot of authority in that time is to make adjustments if necessary if we're seeing that happen here. So if we're seeing, an unusually high or severe crash rate, or this instance where people under the age of 18, so as a reminder for everyone, you would be, use is restricted to people over the age of 18. So if we see something like that happening a lot and we're aware of it, that's the kind of adjustments we can make.
They're supposed to use bike paths and not sidewalks or roads?
Correct. They would be treated like bicycle riders and bike lanes on the streets, not on the sidewalk.
And what is the justification for charging 20 cents per trip when in almost all the other cities I see $1 per vehicle per day? You're talking about a trip. Does that pencil out?
Thank you, Councilmember Scott. There's a couple answers to that question. One, in most of the other cities where you see $1 per vehicle per day, they don't have a limit on the number of vehicles or vendors in their city, and so that rate is used as they call it a dynamic cap. So it's a way to try and ensure that their market isn't oversaturated with scooters, because theoretically a company wouldn't want to launch more scooters than they're getting rides on because they're paying for each scooter. In our case, we have a hard cap of 1,000 scooters, and so we don't necessarily need a dynamic mechanism. Also, we've heard from several companies that this is a very evolving field, and a lot of those companies are saying that that's an unsustainable rate for them, and that that's not possible to move forward at that high level of fee, and preferring a per trip fee. So we've set our per trip fee on the higher end of what we've seen for per trip fees around the country.
Are there private personal scooters of this type being sold currently, and are they regulated under the same rules, or is it open season?
There are private electric scooters being sold right now. Currently, that's illegal to operate them in the city of Tucson. I think that is something that, if it were your pleasure, we would want to address. There's a fairness question there. If we're allowing companies to come in and provide them for the public to use, then in my opinion, it makes sense to allow for private use as well, but that would need to be addressed and it's through ordinance, I believe.
When they're sold, are the new owners of these privately purchased vehicles told that there are some rules and regulations that go above and beyond just bicycle or roller skating or anything else that someone might do on a public property?
When they're
Yes.
sold for personal use, I can't answer that exactly what information they get. I will say we've had several people contact us since we've engaged in this process and ask, hey, I'm looking into buying one of these. Would it be legal to operate it now?
Right. And the last question I have is about the impound. That would be generated by complaints, right? So complaints would go, is that a 911 call, or is that what is that?
Yeah.
Who calls?
Good question. So anyone could call. Our enforcement agents would call, and we have a tracking mechanism internally, so we know when the report was made, how many scooters, their scooter IDs, and where they're located. So we would report that to the operator, and the operator is supposed to come pick them up. If they don't, or if there's if they don't, then we can take them and assess a fine to the operator.
Are you saying there's a special phone number?
Yes, we require that they provide a phone number for a unique phone number for city staff to call to directly be in touch with.
So a private person sitting in a home who has a complaint that they don't want that scooter near, around, or on their property needs to call what number?
There will be multiple opportunities for the public to wage complaints. So one would be directly, we require that that information is available on every scooter. So they'll have that, they'll know what company the scooter is, and there will be a means of contacting the company. We also intend on having an online comment form for the full duration of the pilot. In addition, I didn't talk about our evaluation, but in addition to a survey we would field for the general public. So they would be able to contact us, they'd be able to contact the department. We've been coordinating internally, so if that came to TPD or it came to transportation, we would know how to handle it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Councilmember Fimbres.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've had a number of incidents with hit and runs and injuries and fatalities, especially last week. And would mandatory bike helmets be a part of this RFP proposal?
Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Because they would be regulated like bicycles and there's an 18-year-old age limit, they would not have mandatory helmets for adults to operate these. However, we do require that operators provide helmets to users upon request, and we also require that operators field any safety information we feel pertinent to users in the app before they check out a scooter. So if we want to include information that lets people know you can get a helmet, we can include that.
Okay, and how would this program ensure the city legally from potential liability cases?
May I defer to the attorney's office on that question?
Like,
Mr. Mayor, Vice Mayor Fimbres. So you'll see in the materials, and actually this has been a subject of conflict in some of the other jurisdictions in terms of how far the indemnity and insurance provisions go. What we're proposing are very robust indemnity and insurance requirements with high levels of both single occurrence and aggregate insurance to be provided by the vendors. In addition, an indemnification requirement that the vendors indemnify the city against any losses. And as part of the license agreement that is executed between the user and the company itself, so they go on the app to check out the device and be able to use it. As part of that license, they provide a full release to the city with respect to their use of the vehicle. That said, as you are all well aware, that doesn't mean people still can't sue, but it gives the city protection against liability in those suits. There have been some lawsuits now starting to come in some other jurisdictions. It seems that San Diego seems to be the epicenter for the litigation activities so far. Most of the litigation that I've seen, and it's all been recent, as you can imagine, relates to the city, to the extent that that litigation involves the city, is that the city hasn't taken adequate measures to ensure ADA access to its sidewalks. In the cities that I've seen where those actions have been filed, the cities have not had regulations in place yet. And instead, they've entered into interim agreements or permits with certain vendors without having the regulations in place yet. And we're trying to do it in the opposite way, as you're well aware.
and my last question is enforcement component. Who would be required to do the enforcement component? I heard a couple of things. Can you explain it?
My pleasure. Thank you, Councilmember Fimbres. So when it comes to enforcement, I think there's sort of three main areas. There's parking, riding, and then general compliance issues. So general compliance issues being making sure they haven't launched more vehicles than they're allowed to launch, making sure they're staged in appropriate areas. For that, we do have data sharing requirements, so we'll have real-time data about where all the scooters are at every time and where they're going, so if they exceed their cap, we'll know it. When it comes to parking, as we mentioned, both Park Tucson and TPD are able to issue tickets for improper parking on users, as well as, if, like I mentioned, if they're not, if there's reported to the operator that the scooters need to be moved and they're not, then against the company. And then when it comes to riding, both TPD and I believe Park Tucson agents are allowed to write moving violations for riding on the sidewalk, riding against the street, any sort of moving violation. Civil infraction. Chapter 5. I believe it's $25.
Okay, Councilmember Durham.
And just to be clear on that one, the fine is $25 with surcharges. It comes to close to double that. So.
Can you describe in greater detail how the requirement that the operator provide a helmet would work?
Right now, the language says that operators are required to provide a helmet periodically and upon request. So our intention is that we would require that information be provided to users. So before a user checks out a scooter, they're made aware that they can request a helmet of the company, and the company would be required to provide them with one.
So how would that work? Because a user is ready to get on a scooter, and there are no helmets around. So does the company does the operator have to deliver a helmet, or?
Yes, I mean, I think I understand where you're getting at, that for that initial ride, they may not have opportunity to have a helmet if they wanted to ride the scooter at that time, but if it were something a user felt they were going to incorporate into their daily life, they would be able to get a helmet for their future scooter trips.
Is there anything else that we can do to encourage helmet use? Because, you know, this pilot program can be terminated any time. We can make changes on the fly, and we can make changes after 6 months. So from my perspective, if we discover a problem in the administration of this, we make changes. But the one thing we can't address is fatalities or head injuries. And so I think I'm most concerned about encouraging helmet use.
Thank you, Councilmember Durham. Two things I would say to that. One is safety is one of the primary criteria. We'll be ranking proposals. And so for all those vendors listening or tuning in today, we will be scoring, putting additional weight on vendors who have robust safety proposals. So those who come to us with their plans for helmet distribution, helmet awareness, and other safety messaging. Two, I share your concern, and I think that's very important. We can do everything in our power to let people know that helmets are available to them on our social media networks, on our website, with our public comment form, at tabling events, on our side as well.
Councilmember Cunningham.
My first question is about the 1,000 cap. How are we going to know that they only have 1,000? I mean, I can't imagine we have an auditor that can go out every day, drive around, and count 1,000 scooters. Are they going to have a sticker? Are they going to be geocoded? Are we going to have access to these companies' software so we can track the scooters, so we know that they say they're only putting out 1,000, they're indeed only putting out 1,000? That's the first question I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Cunningham. Yes, I feel very confident we will know. We have a very robust data sharing requirement. There's now an industry standard called MDS, or Mobility Data Specification, that cities require operators provide them with. It gives them a lot of information, but including the quantity and location of scooters, how many trips have been taken, and we've engaged in discussions with both our IT department and several third-party vendors of data management companies who help us track that. So there's actually some really incredible tools where at the touch of a button we can see where they all are, where they've been going, and how many trips we've had. That's also important for us invoicing the company, since we're basing it on a per-trip fee, so we need to know how many trips were taken and verify that. So whether we do that in-house or whether we use a third party to do it, it's definitely possible.
My second question regarding the safety piece, I see that we have a requirement of 15 miles an hour as the max speed. However, the scooters are permitted to have a top speed of 20 miles an hour. Is that for leeway, and how are we going to clock them? Is it possible for us with the software that when that they can program these scooters when it hits a certain speed too fast, it locks its brakes, or I wouldn't want to do that to anybody. That would be a bad joke. But it sends off a beep or something. I mean, can we have that type of requirement in there? It's probably pretty important. I've been on them, and you can get up there. And so I just want to be sure that there's some type of safety provision in there, that if people are hitting a speed too much, some type of alarm can go off, and if you're operating at that speed, we're going to know about it. And then so I think that would be one of those pieces that hasn't really been tried yet, but it's definitely something that all cities who have this in place need to be looking at.
Mr. Bemis, there's a limit to what these things can do, isn't there?
Yes, sir. We would require that they're capped at 15 miles per hour in the city of Tucson, and it is definitely our intention to test that and make sure that we're not able to get scooters going above that in Tucson. It is my understanding from our discussions with several vendors that it is technically feasible to implement slow zones where the top speed is something lower than 15. So that is something we can implement, and we're asking all of the applicants to describe their full suite of geofencing capability in their applications. We'll give additional consideration to those that have the most robust geofencing capabilities. We're only requiring at the outset that they make it such that a user cannot end a trip in a geofenced zone. But if it becomes clear that there are parts of town where it's important that people aren't going over 8 miles an hour, over whatever, it's my understanding that they do have the technology to do that.
My next question is specifically about the 4th Avenue underpass. And the reason is because if you've walked under the 4th Avenue underpass, and quite a few city residents have, number one, when people roll their bikes at full speed while you're walking in the 4th Avenue underpass, that situation really sucks. The second thing is that now that we're going to have more people on scooters underneath the 4th Avenue underpass, we probably need to step up enforcement for both bikes and scooters going under that underpass. I'm sorry, but that's so dangerous right now. It's dangerous for bikes who do it the right way and try to ride on the road because they could get clipped, but it's just as dangerous for people who are walking and somebody decides to ride their bike through the underpass. I mean, we need to have like signage up there that says you have to walk under here. That's just, I know that's a very micro specific piece of this, but I can't stress to you more how dangerous that is. So I just wanted to point that out in today's discussion because that's one piece. That's a very high traffic area where people walk from 4th Avenue to downtown all the time. There are always people under there. And rolling through at 15 miles an hour when you're on that hill is not a good situation. So that was my next discussion point with that. I also wanted to talk about the 15 feet from the curb. Now, no other city has set up some type of certification for stagers. I don't know what else to call them. Nesters, if you're bird, tree guys, if you're lime, I suppose. But the bottom line is that there's these stager guys, and the stager guy's job is to drive around town and pick up scooters. They go home and charge them for the night. That's how they get paid. And the next morning they go out and put the scooters out. That's how this business works. I don't know if everybody knows that. I'm not trying to teach everybody like they're ignorant. I'm just walking through the process here. We're going to regulate these companies, Lime and Bird or whoever bids on this RFP. But we need to probably, they are there is no like training or requirements or etiquette requirements of the stager guys. And that's part of the problem. In Long Beach, when these first came out, 2 stager guys literally got into a fight over scooters to pick up because it was how they made their money. And so there were like people, oh, I'm charging this one. No, I'm charging this one. And those were the conflicts that impaired. So for me, training the stager guys is a big piece to this. This is the most integral piece. In other words, the stager guys have to have some type, we have to be able to know who they are. They have to be able to sign up on the idea of where they're going to stage them in the morning. I mean, we can't just leave that up to the operator.
Mr. Bemis, have you had that discussion with any of these operators as how bikes come in?
How are we going to train and certify the stager guys?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Cunningham. Not all vendors use stager guys. Some do, and some use full-time local staff to staff their operations. We require that any operator who's operating here has at least one full-time employee, not contract employee, working here and working on these issues for maintenance, for rebalancing. So that's one. Training, right? Yeah. At this time, I don't have a good answer for that. I suppose I don't know how we haven't included any requirements for meeting or knowing of this.
So this is where I'm at.
But that's easy enough to put into your RFP.
This is where I'm at, and I want to make this really clear. I'm okay with doing a pilot on this. I've said so from the beginning. I've actually ridden Lime and Bird. I kind of thought they were pretty cool, and you know, I come from that standpoint. But I'm not going to vote for this agreement unless we have some type of certification process for the stager guys. It's just not going to happen. I cannot go forward unless we know. I want to know who the people are that are handling this equipment, and that they know what they're doing when they're putting it out. Because there's no incentive for them to put, right now, if you're a stager guy and how you get paid is ride use of where you put them out at. There is no incentive to you to consider public safety. There's no incentive for you to consider what our regulations are. There's no incentive so we have to figure out that piece. Otherwise, it's going to get lost. And, you know, otherwise, the people who do not want this at all will continue to have valid critique of what's going on. So I think if we get that piece in, I'm very comfortable moving forward.
Okay. Councilmember Kozaczek, I assume you have some opinion here?
Yeah, but Paul, you were cut off like twice. Did you have more? Or? He's gotten one question in twice, and then everyone jumped.
Oh, Councilmember Durham.
Yeah.
I wasn't done with
He takes long pauses. I appreciate that. Okay.
Lime recently pulled out of Tempe. Why did they do that?
Thank you, Councilmember Durham. I believe there are representatives from Lime or people representing Lime in the room if you'd like to hear directly from them. My understanding is that Tempe, they cited Tempe's fee structure and indemnification language as barriers to them continuing to operate there. That said, I understand that several other companies have applied and received a permit to continue operating in Tempe, and my understanding from staff is that Lime may also be intending on reapplying. So,
and it may be that our regulations are such that certain people won't apply, and that'll be okay.
So was it the $1 per scooter per day?
That's my understanding, but I'm not.
My understanding is that the indemnity language was also something that they did not come to agreement with the city of Tempe.
Okay. I want to talk about the insurance limits. Those in the draft we have before us. Those are in excess of the current standard for procurement contracts. Is that right?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Durham, yes, those are higher than you typically see in our other contexts. And quite frankly, we've had some internal discussions already that we may be comfortable with somewhat lower at, say, 2 and 4 million for a single occurrence and aggregate, as opposed to 3 and 6, which it may be fair to criticize as being prohibitively expensive for the vendor to secure.
What is our current standard for procurement contracts?
Well, it can depend on the nature of the activity for which we're procuring. In some instances, we require a minimum insurance of a single occurrence at $1 million, but we evaluate it contract by contract based on the nature of the activity, and there are other instances where it's $2 million, sometimes $3 million.
Okay.
Just as a quick example, when there was a proposal to have a certain type of amusement park ride downtown for a particular event, we weren't going to accept that use unless there was a $3 million single occurrence protection versus, say, a $1 million.
But $2 million per incident and $4 million in the aggregate is closer to where we would, closer to the average for procurement contracts.
I think that's a fair characterization.
Could we make that change?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have to discuss that. One of the things I I like is that because of the dockless nature of e-scooters, they go where the demand is, including underserved areas. And we've got this special incentive for high-stress areas, 250 more scooters that don't count against the daily ride requirements, right? This has the potential to really add a transportation option to high-stress areas, underserved areas that, for which there are less transportation choices. So I really like that. And I think it has the potential to decrease greenhouse gas emissions. In Portland, I understand, and we'll get survey data as a result, as part of our pilot project. 34% of Portland residents displaced car trips, and 45% of tourists displaced car trips. I think when you can achieve those numbers, that can only be a good thing. On indemnification, can you describe the current provisions regarding indemnification?
So the indemnification requirement as from the vendor to the city indemnifies the city against any damages, losses, et cetera, claims arising out of these activities other than the only thing that's excluded, in other words, that the city could still have liability for, would be if it's something that we are where we have had sole negligence on our part, or negligence, which is another concept that we're discussing.
And the reason for the sole negligence provision is to prevent the situation where there is shared liability, and but the city's position would be that, but for the presence of the e-scooters, this accident wouldn't have happened.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And I also want to mention that there's not just the indemnity from the vendor to the city, but there's the release and indemnification by the individual users because they have to execute a license through their agreement with the vendor to use the device as well. So we get that layer of protection as well.
I talked to Bird. They contacted me and said they'd like to have a phone conversation. And I know that they are very concerned about specific sections, two specific sections in the indemnification provision. If they are likely to be highly ranked, I would like to get a commitment from staff to at least sit down with them and talk about their concerns. That's all, I think.
Okay, you sure?
Well, no, I won't. I won't let you hold me to that.
We'll have a limited second round. Councilmember Kasache.
Done for now. So you expect 34% of our car travel to be displaced by scooters?
Well, that was the survey.
There's no way in hell that that's accurate. The 34% of people that would otherwise have gotten into their car got on a scooter.
No, 34% of e-scooter riders in Portland said that they displace a car trip.
Okay. That's fundamentally different. So let's talk about this. The proposals for up to 1,500 scooters, likely, very likely 1,000 around downtown. Who knows where, but they're going in the downtown core, main gate, 4th Avenue, as Paul said, and 4th Avenue underpass is not a micro concern. It's a serious concern. We have, it's horrible traffic in there already, and it's dangerous. And adding these to the mix, not on the sidewalk, but even in the underpass itself. And then you come up out of there, and you're probably entering one of the worst intersections in all of North America, where you have the confluence of Broadway and Toole and 4th Avenue and the Central Garage and all that. And so, Paul Durham, you want to lower the insurance requirement as well?
Well, I want to make it comparable to the average for procurement contracts.
Okay, so the pilot is proposed to be 6 months. It's starting in May. That means that it will be conducted during the heat of the summer while U of A students are gone. That's not going to be a good test. If we really want to know what the impact of these are going to be, you don't do it while people are gone, while the 40,000 students are out of the area. It's also, and we've got Julie Katzel here to confirm, that they're illegal still on campus, and she nods yes. Explain, well, I'll get to that in a minute. We're projected to gross $132,000 in 6 months for 1,000 scooters. How do the IT costs that we're going to have to absorb come off the top of that, or how do they impact that proposed revenue?
Thank you, Councilmember Kozaczyk. If we decide that storing the data ourselves over the long term is something we want to invest in, IT gave us an estimate of $150,000 to procure server space. That is not necessarily necessary in the long term. So we can, companies will provide us with an API where we can receive data, analyze it, and we don't necessarily need to store it over the long term. There are also third-party vendors who will store that for us, and their rates vary. We've had discussions with them, and they vary between $5,000 to $35,000 annually for those services.
Okay, so there's a cost. So the projected revenue is not a net figure. It's a gross figure, and we're going to have costs associated with that. How are we going to enforce the 18-year-old limit? Shirley was asking some totally legitimate questions about enforcement. So how are we going to enforce that?
Thank you, Councilmember Kozaczyk. That's a very good question. My understanding is that most vendors require a form of identification when you register to check out a vehicle, so a driver's license or some other form of identification to verify your age when checking it out. I'm unaware of how extensive or how other cities are treating someone who might check it out and then give it to a minor to operate.
Okay. Cunningham also mentioned staging clutter, another completely legitimate concern, and related to that, Shirley mentioned enforcement again. We have in requirement number 4, any pilot program compliance fees arising from the need for city crews to relocate or remove, or the fees plus 15%. So city crews are going to enforce this. We have a 2-hour grace period for the clutter. Who goes out and does the impoundment?
Councilmember Kozaczyk, should it become necessary, city crew would impound. Again, should it become necessary, our hope is that it would not.
And we're hiring a lead planner to track down violators and confiscate them, and a management assistant who takes complaints about the clutter? That's in pilot program fees and attachment 3?
Yes, sir. That is for reviewing the data, so we have the data available. It would be formatted either internally by our IG department or by a third-party vendor where we can track those instances and where they're staged, and if there's, so that's what the lead planner role is. And then the management assistant is for creating a database of if and when our parking agents or TPD submit a complaint to the company, we can track when that happens so we can follow up.
So I would hope that our TPD officers have more important things to do than chase down scooters laying in the middle of sidewalk downtown. We're talking about TPD, we're talking about Park Tucson, we're talking about a management assistant, we're talking about a lead planner, controlling the clutter in a 2-hour window for them to go out and clean this up. Are we charging $150 for every scooter we have to go out and redeploy? It seems to me that there was some language in there for that.
Yes, we would be allowed to do up to that, yes.
And we have the staffing to take this burden on, or are we talking about adding FTEs?
We're not talking about adding FTEs at this time. And I'll say if this, our intention in moving forward with this was if it becomes clear that we don't have the staffing to take this on and we're not able to get that staffing and it's a major issue, that we would terminate the pilot.
Let's talk about the deployment you indicate that permittees shall not deploy their fleet within transit shelters. And then it says permittees are encouraged to deploy their fleet near transit stops, and the scooters shall not be parked in landscape or furniture zones within transit zones. So pull that apart a little bit. Do we want them near transit zones or not?
Yes, sir. We met with our transit folks, and they were concerned about scooters in the transit stop. So on the pad between the bench, let's say, and the boarding zone. So we try to add language such that they should not be staged in that area within the transit stop or on a streetcar platform. However, we want to encourage... How close can they be to a bus stop? Adjacent to the bus stop, not in between the stop and where the bus loads. But we encourage them to deploy adjacent to the bus stops.
So north and south of it, but not east and west of it. That's
correct.
Let's talk about the geofencing. The language says geofencing capabilities that require capabilities that at a minimum prevent a user from ending a trip within a defined prohibition zone. So they're not prevented from riding through areas, but they're simply prevented from ending a trip in an area.
That is correct.
Okay, so I believe that when we had the conversation before, one of your, Jonathan's, concerns was that we geofence off areas that they can't ride through. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about geofencing so you can't end a trip in a particular area. So, for instance, they could ride from the Sam Hughes neighborhood through the U of A campus, and then the burden shifts to the UAPD to enforce that. What would the citation be for riding through a geofenced area or for a prohibited area?
Well, I guess there's two components to that. One, I would say that, as I mentioned earlier, our understanding is that some companies do have the technology to restrict riding, to make the scooter either go slow or come to a stop in a geofenced area, and it's something we could consider either at the outset or during the pilot program if we find that it's necessary. U of A is aware of that level of requirement in our pilot right now, and I don't want to speak for their enforcement arms, but I understand that if scooters are left, which we hope the requirement to not end a trip in a geofenced area would keep scooters from being parked on campus, that they would impound them if they do happen to be left there. I don't want to speak for U of A on how they would address people riding.
So that was just one
on
example
campus.
because Julie's here, but I'm saying, what's to prevent someone from just dumping a scooter in front of a bus stop and walking away?
Someone could do that, and then we would rely on our enforcement mechanism to address it.
Yeah, they will do that. I mean, they just will. Let's talk about the indemnification because there were a couple of questions from Paul about that. So we have language in here that we're asking these vendors to make accessible to the users. It says, under number 2, activity and associated risks. I have chosen to rent and use a shared mobility device in Tucson, Arizona with a permitted shared mobility entity. And I understand that this activity is inherently hazardous. I may be exposed to dangers and hazards, falls, fractures, concussions, hostile or aggressive pedestrians, bicyclists losing control and crashing, and then it goes on up to and including permanent brain damage and death. Is that really something that we want the city to get involved with, where we're having someone sign off on that and say, I understand this could kill me, but the city's good with it anyway? I mean, really?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, sometimes legal language isn't particularly appetizing, but it's necessary to give us the greatest level of protection. And so we have to make it clear that it's a knowing waiver of the types of injuries or risks that the user is taking on.
So we have enforcement issues, we have clutter issues, we have safety issues, we have accidents. I can't even imagine these tiny little wheels navigating the streetcar tracks. I think we ought to be learning from the experiences of other jurisdictions who have tried this and said, no, I don't think we need to take 6 months to study this to find out that those issues are going to be just a hassle. I don't even support moving forward with the pilot program. I say we studied it, gave it the good effort, but there are too many possibilities of this thing going south.
Okay. Anybody else before? Okay. I want to get a few words in, but I'll wait for the two of you. Let's go Councilmember Romero and then Councilmember Durham.
So how do you evaluate the 6-month program? What is going to be the evaluation questions? How do we arrive at, is this a good program or this is not going to work out in Tucson?
Thank you, Councilmember Romero. That's a very good question. There are several categories of information I think we intend on trying to collect, and obviously safety is the first and foremost. So we've connected with TPD and fire and then all of our first responders. So if and when they respond to an incident, they will create a unique code so we can track how many and what's the frequency and severity of crashes. We've initiated conversations. I'll admit that the mechanism isn't fully there yet for getting emergency room and urgent care data, but we hope to be able to do that as well, so we see what's happening there. Second is ridership. So to what extent did they get rides? We do intend on, and it's a requirement that operators field a survey that we would author to users, similar to what Councilmember Durham referenced in the Portland study. In that, we'd be interested in knowing who's riding scooters, so demographic information, and primarily why they're riding them. Is it for transportation? Is it for recreation? Is it to get to work or to school? And what they would have taken had they not taken a scooter. Obviously, one of our primary goals, as has been mentioned, is to reduce vehicle trips, especially for short trips in the urban core. So ask them, had you not used the scooter, what would you have used? And then in addition to a user survey, we'll field a general public survey because we want to know both of people who use scooters and people who don't, what is the perception in Tucson of them? Are people generally supportive and see them as a positive alternative form of transportation or not? And I imagine they'll be mixed, but those are the sort of survey research we've seen in other cities that have, I think, helped glean insight into how they are or aren't embraced by the city, how safe they are, and whether they're helping us meet our transportation needs.
And these surveys would also be made available to, for example, the businesses where the e-scooters are used the most?
The last.
How do the other stakeholders add their voice to the evaluation process?
Yes, that's a very good question. And yeah, I think absolutely we would want to know what the businesses in the areas that the scooters have been launched, how they feel about them, if they want more of them, if they want less of them, et cetera. I would be interested in also learning if and how they support the local economy. So if we we're working with some researchers at the U of A to try and design this survey, but understanding how sales in the areas they've been launched have differed before and after.
And then the slow zones, are they going to be chosen by the staff, by the stakeholders? How do we arrive at we're going to have slow zones on, downtown, on Congress, on 4th Avenue? How do we determine those slow zones if we are going to request slow zones in the area of usage?
Thank you, Councilmember Romero. So right now the ordinance gives direction to the Director of Transportation to implement those with the vendors. But that said, I think we would very much want to be in discussion with the Downtown Tucson Partnership, FAMA, the Marshall Foundation, as well as individual business owners, especially if we're seeing an unusual increase in crash rate or anything like that, or just as a cautionary measure.
Just to start with.
Yeah.
Let's start
absolutely.
the program with. Okay.
Councilmember Durham. Then
I think, Councilmember Romero, that we're hoping for experience gained from the pilot project to determine where the slow zones should be. I would like to just point out that all forms of transportation carry risks with them. Could you describe the penalties to the operators for failure to comply with the 2-hour move the scooter rule?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Durham. So we'd have fees up to $180 for improperly parked scooters per incident, and fines for up to $2,500 for other non-compliance issues, such as exceeding the cap. And we intended to have a sort of graduated sanctions effort. So first infractions, it's a fine or a secondary fine. We do have the authority to suspend or ultimately terminate the permit.
So So if an operator doesn't move a scooter within the 2-hour limit, what happens to them?
We would have the authority to impound the scooter and assess a fine against the company.
All right. Well, I've studied it, I guess, like everyone else. I do believe that many of the problems that we've heard about, mainly in other cities, have occurred because these scooter companies came in without regulation. We're not going to be doing that. I think staff has done its best to incorporate lessons learned by other cities, the requirements for insurance, indemnification, which I agree with, maximum speed and geofencing to prevent parking in prohibition zones, and I appreciate that somebody can park and somebody will have to go pick it up. Provide reasonable protections to the city and the public. And I think we all see the potential negatives, but there are also positives. Some people like to use these things to get around. To the extent they replace a car, they are reducing emissions, and they are definitely helping with mobility. The study from Portland was actually, to me, a little bit surprising, but very encouraging about the number of people, low-income population, and people of color who use these, at least in Portland. I think that's a good thing. And it'll help with parking. It is a 6-month pilot program. The city reserves the right to terminate the program at any time and to require a vendor to remove its scooter fleet with 5 days' notice. So I am prepared, hoping that there's going to be diligence to give this a try. So, but we haven't had a motion, so I'm waiting for a motion.
So I have a question for you then. Last time we were talking about this, you were very sensitive to the concerns of the 4th Avenue merchants about scooters being driven up and down 4th Avenue, and you, I believe, were convinced that the geofencing would prevent that from happening. Now that you know that the geofencing isn't going to do squat for that, how do you feel about that?
Well, what I understand, at least from what I've heard today, is that although the geofencing can't stop the scooters from coming in, it can slow them down. In other words, there can be a zone where they can only go so fast. And I think at a certain point we have to see what happens. I have no question but that 4th Avenue is going to get some use. And I think part of that will depend on where these guys decide they should be placed.
Well, it's going to get significant use. It's going to get the most use. It's going to be coming from down the streetcar corridor through 4th Avenue into downtown. That's where they're going to be going. And we don't have to, quote, see how it goes or see what happens. We can simply say, no, it's a bad idea.
Yeah, I had thought from reading some other programs that basically there would be encouragement to go on the non-main corridors, and that the transportation department can do that, and where they place these, where they tell the scooter companies they need to at least set them out will help with that. So for instance, I was thinking about this morning, 3rd Street, which goes into the university, it's a non-main corridor, and a good non-main corridor. So I think we can work with it. Steve, I'm not going to tell you that these things, that they don't come with risk. They do. And that's why I would not compromise on the insurance and indemnification clauses for everybody, for the protection of the user, for the protection of the city. I'm willing to give it a try.
So both of our groups of first responders, both police and paramedics, have better things to do than pick up scooters and pick up scooter riders who've done face plants.
Councilmember Cunningham.
That's true, but there's also the possibility that, I mean, if we don't try it, we still don't know whether or not there is a positive impact of traffic flow going east to west. And we can't say with certainty which area people are going to use it. Yes.
Yeah, we can. Ask the damn vendors. They're not going to put them out on Rita Ranch.
I can't say with certainty. There may be some other niche places that they're going to be used. Look, it's 6 months. We're going to put it, you know, I'm not going to vote for this thing unless we have the provision to certify the stagers. That's my one thing that I want to put in there when we come back. But the bottom line is
what does that even mean, to certify a staging guy?
Well, they'll have to have some type of training. So have to have a training saying how many they can have in one spot, how far away they have to have. They have to know.
This draft,
Otherwise, we can't enforce it.
this draft policy isn't even close to that.
Look, Steve, we don't even know. There's a lot of unknowns about these, and that's what makes it. I guess that's what can make it a little bit. You can make someone hesitant to try this, but there's some cities that are appreciative of this. Not every city that had them dumped on them got rid of them. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Is Tucson a scooter type town or not? Well, should we just say no, or do we deserve to find out? And that's the real question here. So that's why we give it the 6 months. I'm willing to do that.
Well, we're about to find out if somebody makes a motion.
I move that we direct staff to take into account the things you heard today and come back with a motion in 2 to 4 weeks for maybe 4 weeks?
How much time do you need?
Oh, okay. We're on for next meeting, but I'm giving you the option to take more time, to take until the following meeting if you want it, if you need it, with a final proposal for the consent agenda.
Yeah, and by the way, speaking of taking time, Steve makes a very good point. I don't know why you would start this thing in July, so I don't know why, so.
I agree.
There's not a giant rush on it.
Mr. Mayor, I'm going to second Mr. Durham's motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Yes, Your Honor. Do we want? It's a mixed bag again. If we launch in July as kind of a soft opening, we can get a pretty good indicator. We'll have a lot less use. But if we wait and we let them go at, like, say we start them August 1st or August 15th, it'll kind of be all at once. So there's a plus or minus to that, and it's at the council's pleasure to make that. I think that 1 month of leeway is actually a good thing, because we might get some indicators that we could go 30 days in and say, you know what, we better pull the plug on this before the students come back. So I like that back door of starting on July 1st.
All right. We'll let these guys get to work if we get a positive vote.
I have a question. For Mr. Rankin, are potholes and streetcar tracks considered under the indemnity language that we're exempt if someone hits a pothole?
Councilmember Kozaczek, well, a couple of things. Yeah, I mean, we're still going to have the protection from the rider themselves, okay, in addition to the indemnity from the company. The other thing is, we have experience now in defending claims relating to the streetcar tracks with bicycles, and we have definitively prevailed in all of those instances with respect to our streetcar tracks and operations. With respect to bicycles, I would expect to be as successful with respect to scooters as well.
So we want to start fighting those. Have we discussed performance bonds with these companies? So if they fail or come into noncompliance or bankruptcy?
I don't know if we're including bonds within the proposal.
They're not in the draft. I'm just asking.
Mr. Lust, do you have a?
I apologize, Mayor and Council. The current draft contemplates a $30 per vehicle performance bond.
Okay.
$30.
All right. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed?
No.
I just want to make sure, was that 5-2? Okay. 5-2. All right. Let's move on to item 8. State and national. Are there any state and national legislation or regional committee issues for discussion? Mr. Greenhill.
Sure. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, I provided earlier today some feedback on some questions on federal legislation for the vice mayor. With that, I'm happy to answer questions. If not, we could just turn to the bills.
Let's go to the bills.
Okay. So in front of you, you have the bills under consideration this week. Happy to answer any questions and welcome a motion to accept.
Yeah.
I'll second that motion.
We got a motion and a
I just
second. Any
have one
discussion?
question.
Go ahead.
One question. There is a bill that received a hearing in terms of domestic violence. I was looking for the number of the bill.
Okay.
Domestic violence in Native American nations. Does that
It does ring a bell. Yeah. Honorable Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Romero, there's a bill that would establish a study group for missing and violence against indigenous women.
Yes.
I've brought that bill to Mayor and Council, and you voted to support that
Okay,
bill.
so we already.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? If not, we've got a motion and a second to support the recommendations. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? That passes. Item 9, does anybody have anything to remove from consent this evening? I'm taking that as a no. Anything for future agendas at this time?
Mayor, Council Member Romero and I request that time be set aside for the Mayor and Council to receive an update on the U.S. Census 2020, Tucson's complete count committee, and the pending litigation over the citizen question the administration is trying to add for the census.
I got that memo today, and assuming we have time on the 19th, we'll do it then.
Okay, and then for April 9th study session, I'm requesting that the Mayor and Council receive an update on the City of Tucson's P-card program. Both memos have been submitted.
Okay. Mr. Ortega, you guys good to go on the 9th on that?
We'll be ready.
Okay. All right, let's adjourn. It is 5:32. We're going to come back at 5:45. Going to stand in session. Let's go to roll call. She is in the building. I expect her momentarily.
Mr. Cunningham.
He is in the building. I expect him momentarily.
Mr. Durham. Here. Mrs. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Fimbres. Here. Mr. Kozaczyk.
Here.
Mayor Rotchot.
Present. We have a quorum. The invocation will be given by Chaplain Scott McKinney from the Tucson Fire Department. After the invocation, I ask that you remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Our gracious God, we humbly bow before you in this quiet moment to acknowledge your presence and your power, and to thank you for the opportunity to serve the city of Tucson. In the spirit of grace, you have blessed this city and this nation. Help us to remember each day those who are in harm's way, protecting our freedom. Tonight we ask for strength, guidance, wisdom, and a spirit of harmony for these council members of the city of Tucson and for our nation's leaders. We thank you for their dedication and their service. They are all leading us through troubled times. Give them clear direction. Fill us with peace. Make us one people united in our praise of you. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Maybe she's back out of here. I would like to proclaim March to be Old Pueblo Archaeology Month. Monica Young, excellent. President of the Old Pueblo Archaeology Center is here to accept. If you could come forward, ma'am. As I think everyone knows, this is a land that has been inhabited for over 6,000 years. And when that happens, there can be a lot that can be forgotten. And the study of archaeology is a way for us to preserve our past and learn about our past and appreciate our past. So with that, I am going to proclaim this as Old Pueblo Archaeology Month by doing this. Whereas Tucson's many archaeological and historic cultural resources manifest our city's heritage as the oldest continually occupied community in the United States. And whereas March is Arizona Archaeology and Heritage Awareness Month, and whereas the nonprofit Old Pueblo Archaeology Center celebrates its 25th anniversary on March 18, 2019. And the Old Pueblo Archaeology Center has provided heritage education to Tucson schools, residents, and visitors. Whereas Tucson's resident visitors are encouraged to learn about and visit Tucson's many archaeological and historic cultural resources. Now, therefore, I, Jonathan Rothschild, Mayor of the City of Tucson, do hereby proclaim the month of March 2019 to be Old Pueblo Archaeology Month in this community and encourage all of our residents to appreciate and promote Tucson's heritage as our nation's oldest continuously occupied community, as well as our city's role as a leader in Arizona's archaeological research and education. Or if I put my hand and seal this 5th day of March 2019, I'd like to hand you this proclamation, and if you have a few words to say, we'd like to hear them from you.
Thank you. On behalf of Old Pueblo Archaeology, we'd like to thank the mayor and the council for proclaiming March as Old Pueblo Archaeology Month. Since 1993, Old Pueblo Archaeology has been educating the public about archaeological and cultural historical resources of this region and fostering the preservation of these non-renewable resources. This proclamation recognizes and reinforces the importance of this cause, and we thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it. Item 2D.
Appointments to boards, committees, and commissions. Report from City Manager.
City Manager's communication number 63, dated March 5th, is received into and made part of the record. I don't know that we have any other appointments. Does anybody have any appointments to make tonight?
I thought, Mr. Mayor, the motion was to appointments of Mark T. Murphy, RG, PhD, to the Pima County Flood District Advisory Committee.
I see that. Why don't you make that motion?
And Catherine Moutray to the Tucson Commission on Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Issues. And Chris Stevie to the Design Review Board.
Okay, I see that Mark is in the audience as either Catherine or Chris here. Mark, if you could stand, if either Catherine or Chris are here. Mark, thank you for your service. I know you've served in a number of capacities for us, particularly related to water issues, and thank you for your willingness to continue to serve. We all appreciate it. Thank you.
There's a second to the motion.
Oh, I guess we have to vote first. All right, so there's a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? That motion carries. Now, are there any personal appointments to be made at this time?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to appoint Mr. Willie Blake as the Ward 5 representative on the 2018 Bond Oversight Committee. And I would also like to appoint Mr. Jay Young as the Ward 5 representative on the Planning Commission.
Okay. Second.
I don't think you have to. I think you just appointed him. All right, item 3.
Mayor and council reports, summary current events.
City Manager's communication number 59, dated March 5, is received and made part of the record. This time has been scheduled to allow members of the mayor and council to report on current events. Does any council member have anything to report at this time? Council Member Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Women in Construction Month. And March 9th, the National Association of Women in Construction, along with Habitat for Humanity, invite the community to a Women Build event, which basically means that women will be building a Habitat for Humanity home. Grab your hard hats and tool belts and let's build homes, hope, and community alongside amazing women in Tucson. You have to register for the Women Build event. You can call Ann Vargas at 520-326-1217, extension 226. And this would be a wonderful community for any woman and their children to come build a home, build hope, and show your muscles. So please call Ann Vargas. She's the one that's organizing the Women Build event for Habitat for Humanity at 326-1217, extension 226.
Councilman Cunningham?
Your Honor, I just wanted to thank the organizers from the Tucson Festival of Books, allowing us to participate. I don't know how many of us got to moderate some of the discussions, but I was there both Saturday and Sunday. The event was unbelievable. We had some tremendous writers come in: Leonard Pitts, Ed Asner, Maddie Friedman, and we It's really an honor for us to host Ian Thompson of Sports Illustrated. I had a nice chat with on Saturday night, and the great thing on talking to some of these authors, and a lot of them are they're correspondents around the world. They're also well-known correspondents around the world, and they come in and they I couldn't tell you how many compliments I got about the city of Tucson itself and how much it's changed since they first started coming to the Festival of Books, and how wonderful it is here and how amazing and the changes that they see. So I wanted to just acknowledge our community, Bill and Brenda Viner for organizing and kind of founding the event. It's in its 11th year, and it's the best story that I heard this weekend about the Festival of Books is about 10 years ago when the Festival of Books started. The University of Arizona said, we don't have it during spring break. We don't want to have it. It's become such a cool and hip thing that they literally moved the Festival of Books to a non-spring break weekend so the students can be a part of it too. And that kind of shows what an amazing event that is for Tucson. So congratulations to all the organizers on the Festival of Books.
Councilmember Durham.
I'll be at the Habitat Women's Build event. Men are allowed to attend.
Councilmember Scott, anything? Councilmember Fambris.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On Saturday, March 2nd, I had the privilege of representing the city of Tucson as vice mayor at the presentation of the dedication of the Gold Star Mother statue. The ceremony took place at Evergreen Cemetery with more than 300 people present. The life-size bronze statue was presented to Sharon Jones, president of the Tucson chapter of American Gold Star Mothers, on behalf of the son she lost in 2007, Army Staff Sergeant Darrell D. Kaysen, and all the mothers who had lost their children. The memorial honors all deceased veterans who served and is a place where friends and families can visit to reflect on the ultimate sacrifice that their families have made. I want to thank everybody who participated in the ceremony and the Gold Star Mothers for the ultimate sacrifice they paid. In excitement, the next chapter of the Renaissance of the South Side from the work my Ward 5 office is taking place on Thursday, March 7th at 4 p.m. with the official grand opening of the El Rio Cherry Bell Health Center, which is at 1230 South Cherry Bell Avenue. The grand opening marks 2 years of work with El Rio Health to get Ward 5 and the South Side this new medical facility. El Rio Cherry Health Center adds 100 new health care positions, as well as having primary care for children and adults, lab, radiology, including mammograms, ultrasound and x-ray, behavioral health, pharmacy, dental, and health and wellness classes. My chief of staff and I work with El Rio to coordinate meetings with the city staff, coordinate meetings with surrounding neighborhood associations and businesses to get them around the table to discuss the proposed health center. I want to thank Nancy Johnson and Enrique Cerna, El Rio Health Center Board President, and the Rio Health Center Board for their work and support of bringing a new health care facility to the South Side. Nancy Johnson and the Rio Health Center are a key component to the Tucson Homeless Work Program, providing health screening for people wanting to go back to work. I want to thank my colleagues on the council voting to support this new health care facility for Ward 5 and the South Side. I want to thank Suntran and TDOT for getting that much-needed transit stop at El Rio Cherry Bell Health Center, and look forward to the completed stop to be done. I also want to thank the Neighborhood Association's leadership for the 4 surrounding neighborhoods, South Park, Pueblo Gardens, Los Vistas, and Western Hills 2, for the support of the health center. A community located health facility was one of the things the neighborhoods have been asking for, and I'm glad we now have it on Cherry Bell. So I'm hoping to join the mayor, Councilwoman Scott, and myself, and I hope all my other colleagues will come join us on Thursday. The Tucson Roadrunners take on to the ice at the TCC on Friday, March 8th, and Saturday, March 9th against the Ontario Reign and the American Hockey League Action. For tickets, you can call 886-774-6253 or go online to TucsonRoadrunners.com. Exciting, the Tucson Sugar Skulls defeated the San Diego Strike Force 65-44 in their first game as part of the Indoor Football League. The Sugar Skulls homeowner will take place Sunday, March 10th at 3 p.m. at the TCC against the Bismarck Bucks. For tickets or more information, go online to the TucsonSugarskulls.com. And The 2019 Tucson St. Patrick's Day Parade and Festival will take place Sunday, March 17th at Armory Park. The festival runs from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at Armory Park, and the parade will take place at 11 a.m. going through downtown Tucson. The theme of the 2019 parade and festival is Community in Action. For more information, go online to TucsonPatricksDay.com. And on Saturday and Sunday, March 23rd and 24th, Davis Mountain Air Force Base, it will provide their free air show and open house, Thunder and Lightning over Arizona. The 2019 Thunder and Lightning over Arizona Air Show promises to be a weekend packed with heart-pounding air performances and family-friend activities. This is your chance to get up close and personal with the aircraft and the pilots. For more information, call 615-223-1008 or Thunder and Lightning govern over Arizona.com. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Item 4.
City Manager's Report, Summary of Current Events.
City Manager's Communication number 60, dated March 5, is received into and made part of the record. This time it's been scheduled to allow the City Manager to report on current events. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, members of the Council, just wanted to introduce Ms. Barbara Coffey to our team. She's our new Economic Development Director. She started this past week, and I can tell you she hit the ground running on her first day. She attended about 5 meetings. So she'll be making time to go out and introduce herself to each of you and your staff. So we're very excited in having her on board. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Will.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. Let's move on then to item 5.
Liquor License Applications Report from City Manager.
City Manager's Communication number 61, dated March 5, is received into and made part of the record. Mr. Clerk, please read the liquor license agenda.
Your Honor, on this evening's liquor license agenda under item 5B, there are 2 requests for new license, 1 request for person transfer. Under item 5C, there are 10 requests for special events. Under item 5D, there is 1 request for an agent change acquisition of control. Staff has indicated that all the applicants are in compliance with city requirements. An appropriate motion would be to forward items B1 through 3, C1 through 10, and D1 to the State Liquor Board with a recommendation of approval.
So I have a motion, please. Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Any discussion on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Item 6.
Call to the audience.
At this time, any member of the public is allowed to address the mayor and council on any issue. Please make sure you've read the information on the back of your speaker's card before making your presentation. Speakers are limited to 3-minute presentations. Call to the audience is scheduled to last for 30 minutes. Pursuant to the Arizona Open Meeting Law, individual council members may ask the city manager to review a matter, ask the matter to be placed on a future agenda, or respond to criticism made by speakers. However, the mayor and council may not discuss or take legal action on matters raised during call of the audience. We have 5 cards here tonight, so we shouldn't have any difficulty getting through them. We will start with Robert Royce.
Good evening. I'm Robert Royce. I am an independent candidate for mayor, and I'm here tonight to talk about water. Tucson Water Error supplied water with contaminants to thousands, second time. Contaminated water going to some of the poorest, most vulnerable people in this city. Tucson Water says it's okay. They were within federal limits, but limits on carcinogens go down the more carcinogens you have in the mix. And that's never considered by the EPA when they're measuring one chemical. And let me just say, serving contaminated water to our citizens is unacceptable to me. Tucson Water is preparing to distribute our recycled sewage as drinking water. To be honest, I have found 3 people that think that's good policy. Everybody else thinks it's bad policy that I have talked to. Meanwhile, Pima County is using tap water from our fire plugs to flush our sewer lines. And when I talk to them about it, they say, hey, I know we're doing wrong. We know we're doing wrong. The city of Tucson will not supply us with reclaimed water for this purpose. Has anybody seen how much water has been going down the Rito River the last couple weeks? Some of the purest water in America coming off of our mountains, and we don't utilize it. We don't use it to recharge our aquifers. We want to use wastewater. Meanwhile, letting all this pure water is gold in a nation full of contaminated, fracked groundwater. This water coming out of our mountains is our future, and we should be impounding and incarcerating whatever the law and our respect for the environment allows. So you say, well, Robert, you don't like Tucson Water's water policy. Why don't you just do an initiative to fix it? Well, I could, but honestly, it's easier to me to run for mayor on a pure water platform than it is to try to do your job. You're not making water policy. Tucson Water is making water policy. You are the governing body of this city. It is your obligation to make water policy, and you are not doing it. So I'm asking the voters to elect me mayor. Put my name on the ballot first. Elect me mayor in November so I can guarantee pure water to every Tucson citizen and promise that no Tucson citizen will ever get contaminated water again. Thank you.
Ammo Otter. No, I didn't.
Hello. Like, I've been on the campaign trail. Not sure if you can tell or not, but we up in Phoenix, like, we redrafted, like, we got a new initiative to get on the ballot to decriminalize cannabis. Because, like, as you know, like, nobody's OD'd unless you count, like, someone sleeping on the couch as OD. We got, like, so many people, like, a lot of those people working in this building, a lot of the people by A Mountain, a lot of people on the south side that, like, because of contaminated water and air and, like, other stuff, like, we just got, like, way too, like, there's lots of, like, HIV, there's a lot of STDs, there's a lot of cancer, like, and so, like, we need to, like, really, and then the Border Patrol, they're still, like, arresting medical marijuana patients and dispensary agents. So, like, all these people, like, they work hard to, like, get out of jail free card so they could, like, take care of their medical issues. The Border Patrol says they don't care about our local laws. They don't care about our state laws. So, like, they're still, like, going after everybody. So, like, so our new initiative, it's called the Arizona Justice Act of 2020. So the first thing this does under post-conviction relief is it voids all that unnecessary ARS cannabis prohibition anti-hippie laws and policies. Second thing it does is it gives the state and the county and the local municipalities 30 days to start releasing all nonviolent cannabis offenders with clean records. Second thing it does is it offers personal grow rights, unlimited personal gardens for everybody 18 and up. What it does is it allows sales for people with the LLC and a wholesale license. So the next thing it does is it provides a fixed 20% tax on all cannabis products and CBD products and everything else. And so what this does is, this is what we decided with that 20% tax. We drafted it so 50% of that 20% goes to fund our schools. 50% of that we drafted to go to Access and Medicare. So look up, we're going to be at the Sky Bar on Fridays 5 to 8, Chiba Hut Mondays is 6 to 8, and the American Legion down here on Franklin on Wednesdays from 6 to 8. Learn more at ArizonaJusticeLeague.org. Thank you, guys.
And thank you, Anthony. James Garcia.
The timer?
You use the top one.
Which one?
No, the other one, James.
Oh, where's the time? Did I press the timer or did I start? Oh, okay. Cool. I just want to talk about the subject matter of COLA. I'm a city employee, by the way. I've been employed with the city of Tucson since 2002. I'm in the environmental services, a commercial department. I'm a heavy equipment operator. And I started in 2002. I've been employed for just about 17 years, come May. And the subject matter I want to speak about is merits and COLA for all city employees. When I started as a heavy equipment operator, I came from the public sector, and we're very competitive. The city of Tucson was very competitive, and they've always offered good benefits. So in that matter, I was really appreciative. But unfortunately, over the years, we've all been affected by the recession, which took place, I think, officially around 2008, and they stopped giving merits and COLAs, cost of livings. So that's the subject matter I want to bring to the mayor and council. If you guys could really consider reincorporating that again. It seems like we've been putting Band-Aids on the wound, but it's time to really just seriously think about taking care of the employees, because we all have families. We love the police officers, but if I could use them as an example, you could have a 19-year-old kid straight out of high school, go to the academy, graduate, 6 months, 3 months, however long, make just as much as I do, who's been with the city for 17 years, and because I've been affected by the lack of merits and cost of living. And so as an employee, a heavy equipment operator, I have to work during the holidays. Most city employees, they get the holiday off, and then they don't have to worry about coming in Saturday. Unfortunately for us, trash that's one good thing about trash. We're always going to be gainfully employed, but the trash has to get picked up. So we have to come in on the weekends. And so this has been our track record. So, but bottom line is, I just want you guys to really consider, reincorporating the merits. Let's take care of the city employees. Let's go back, and just take care of our own. And so that's what I want to go ahead and encourage you guys to really consider, because, I would like to have kids, but right now I can't afford to have any. And my wife is 33 years old, I'm 47, and, she would like to have kids, but it's expensive to have kids. And I don't want to, miss their childhood. I don't want to miss their baseball games. I don't want to miss, going to their after-school activities, because, I'm coming in on my days off. I'm coming in on weekends. So we're way behind the public sector. That's what I'm saying. We lost a kid recently, 26-year-old kid, didn't even make probation, went to the public sector, is making just as much as I am now. And I've been with the city for 17 years. And this is just not me. It's all city of Tucson. So just consider it and reincorporate it if you can in the contract. Thank you very much.
And thank you. Steve Brown.
That's fine. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Steve Brown. I'm a Tucson native, and I live in Menlo Park. So I'm semi-retired from a diversified career that included being a public school teacher and later working for public health and human rights through municipal, county, and state governments. I go to lots of meetings and have lots of conversations with folks in Tucson, some of whom I grew up with, and others of whom I've only just recently met. These conversations have planted some ideas in my mind as to how we, as a community, might address the development pressures that Tucson is facing in ways that expand access to basic needs and services that represent the fundamental dignity of everyone who lives or works in or visits Tucson. So I hear the word gentrification fairly often, but that's just one piece of the challenge. So tonight I'd like to touch on two broader topics: shared values and community. Last weekend I attended the Tucson Book Festival and met several authors who write about these ideas, and their presentations were very well attended. One of them was Mark Fleerbay, who talked about his book, Manifesto for Social Progress, Ideas for a Better Society. I recommend this book. Given the time constraints, I'm not going to read the whole book to you, but I'd like to add this one quotation. The key values and principles underlying this book include well-being and freedom, security and solidarity, as well as pluralism and toleration, distributive justice and equity, environmental preservation, transparency, and democracy, end quote. So I asked myself, what are the key values and principles that guide our Tucson community, and what's missing? So I see a need here in Tucson for better connectivity among the many people and organizations who manage change. Change is inevitable, but what I see too often is lots of silos where plans get made. The city, the county, the wards, the neighborhood associations, developers, groups like Rio Nuevo, the various chambers of commerce, the downtown partnership, public and private and parochial schools, Pima County, Pima College, the university, and so on. Lots of good people work hard, but too often it seems as if they work in these silos and only occasionally pull together the same way on the same rope by chance rather than by habit. So I think what seems to be missing is a way to connect these silos. And I would hope that there probably is somebody like that whose only job is to make sure everybody knows what everybody else is doing. But if there is, I haven't had a chance to find out who that was yet. So I just wanted to share that if we're going to live up to these values that we hold dear as a city, I think that we need to somehow identify the pattern that connects and connect one another more effectively.
All right, thank you, sir. We have a council member from the town of Gilbert here tonight, Eddie Cook.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members. My name is Eddie Cook. I currently serve as the Vice Mayor in Gilbert. I wanted to share a little action that we did in Gilbert recently. 2 years ago, I attended a leadership conference, and in this conference, there was a session called Civility in the Workplace. It got my attention. And the speaker challenged all the attendees to look at, do you have in your own business, your own corporation, a policy of civility? And it inspired me. I shared this with our council and said, I would like to have a subcommittee formed in the town of Gilbert that will address this particular issue. So we formed a very diverse subcommittee of individuals, spent 10 months, and we have a resolution, which I hope you may have from your town clerk. This resolution is for elected officials, town employees, contractors, volunteers, board and commissioners, and anyone that does business with the town of Gilbert. As we know, in our world today, and even here in our state, hyperpartisanship seems to be the norm, where bipartisanship, or as I would say, nonpartisanship should be the norm. I'm going to take this resolution to our 90 cities and towns in Arizona, because I believe it's the local leaders that's going to create change in our great state. And I think the silent majority in our state is crying out, saying we're done. We're tired of the incivility, which means people don't belong. And we are leaders that are building community, not dividing community. So the language that we have in our resolution is very similar to the resolution that was passed by the U.S. Conference of Mayors back in 2011. I would like to encourage you to have your own civility here in the great city of Tucson. And let's begin together making a one-team culture here in the state of Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Thanks for coming. Mr. Rankin, did we pass the civility when Bob Walker was here? I know
actually, Councilmember Cunningham, the 2011 U.S. Mayor's Conference resolution was sponsored by the city of Tucson.
About to say, I know that Mayor Walkup kind of set the whole thing in motion, so we passed it here, correct?
Mr. Mayor, members of council, I'll be happy to provide the civility accord as well as the code of ethics that the council approved subsequently that includes similar concepts.
Thank you, sir, for coming.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Vice Mayor.
All right, let's go to item 7.
Consent agenda items A through F.
Reports from the city manager on the consent agenda are received into and made part of the record. Mr. Clerk, are you requested to read the consent agenda?
Here on this evening's consent agenda, item A is approval of minutes. Item B is an intergovernmental agreement amendment with the Regional Transportation Authority of Pima County for the Broadway Boulevard, Euclid Avenue to Country Club Road Improvement Project. Item C is real property acquisition of water easements for proposed water infrastructure located in the vicinity of Kolb Road and I-10. Item D is real property acquisition of water easements for proposed water infrastructure located in the vicinity of I-10 and Ruthroff Road. Item E is Tucson Code amending Chapter 22, establishing a self-insured health benefits trust fund and a board of trustees. This item is continued from the meeting of February 20th, 2019. Item F is real property extending the time period for planned area development process for sale of city-owned property located at 930 through 948 East Broadway Boulevard and 935 East 12th Street, formerly the Broadway Volvo site.
May I have a motion, please?
Second.
I move we approve the matters on the consent agenda.
I'm not great with Robert's Rules of Order, but I'm pretty sure you can't make the motion and second it. All right, we got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this matter? Hearing none, let's go to roll call.
Ms. Romero?
Aye.
Mr. Cunningham? Aye. Mr. Durham?
Aye.
Mrs. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Fimbres? Aye. Mr. Kozaczyk?
Roger, you okay with the way that was done?
Yes, sir.
All right, and aye.
Mayor Rothschild?
Aye. The items on the consent agenda are approved by a vote of 7-0. Let's go to item 8.
Lost my place. Economic Development authorizing a government property lease excise tax lease agreement for the Trinity project. This item is continued from the meeting of February 5th, 2019. Report from City Manager, Resolution number 22985.
City Manager's Communication number 64, dated March 5, is received into and made part of the record. Mr. Clerk, you're requested to read Resolution 22985 by number and title only.
Resolution number 22985 relating to economic development incentives and real property, authorizing and approving the government property lease excise tax lease agreement between the City of Tucson and Trinity Project Investors, LLC, for their modern office development located at 434 East University Boulevard.
What's the council's pleasure?
Mayor, this project is going to generate over $6.8 million in capital improvements that increases the property value from about $700,000 to nearly $3 million. Clearly meets the statutory criteria. Therefore, I move that we approve Resolution 22985.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion on this matter? Hearing none, let's go to roll call.
Mr. Kozaczyk? Yes. Ms. Romero?
Aye.
Mayor Rothschild?
Aye.
Mr. Cunningham?
Here. Aye.
Mrs. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Fimbres?
Aye.
Mr. Durham?
Aye.
Resolution 22985 passes by a vote of 7-0. Let's go to item 9.
Adjournment.
Council stand adjourned. Next regularly scheduled meeting March 19th at 5:30 p.m.